Well, why don't you use your divine influence and get us out of this?
Welcome back to our final episode of Return of the Jedi, The End of an Era. If you haven't seen part 1 and 2, we suggest you do that first. Otherwise, let's continue. Now that the heroes have landed on Endor, we see rebel commandos, and one of them is this character who was known as Nik Sant since the 90s. This character can be noticed off and on in upcoming scenes, and would take on the disguise of an Imperial biker scout later in the film. You can see him in his biker scout disguise later, and we will point it out when it happens. Nik appeared as a figure in the Legacy Battle Pack in 2008, and became a sideshow figure as well in 2007. Another version would appear in 2023 in the Vintage Collection. When Disney took over, Dave Filoni wanted to appropriate this character for his designs and claimed that he was no longer Nik Sant, but Captain Rex, or maybe an alias of Captain Rex. Rex was Anakin's clone who resisted Order 66 in the Clone Wars cartoon and would later help the Rebels in the animated show Rebels. In the end, it's up to you to decide what canon you are loyal to where this character is concerned. It is at this scene that we begin to see Han is a different character. Unlike his wisecracking, cynical self, he is now optimistic and plucky. He shows this with this line.
Hey, it's me.
And then he blunders the ambush. And then he continues to be funny by twisting around to get Luke's saber in the net, then trying to blow out the torches vainly by blowing on them. Then telling 3PO to hurry up while interrupting him.
We need some fresh supplies too. Try and get our weapons back.
Hurry up, will ya? I haven't got all day.
During these moments, as a fan of this character, I realized he was not like his old self. This could be debated as a character arc. However, I don't remember this character's depth as only comic relief or outwardly affectionate to Leia, but in this film, these traits are full force, so to speak. As a result, he always seemed off to me. I still love the character despite this, but it stands out very much in this film, and it can be distracting at times. I would be interested in how you all view him in the comments. During 1983, the speeder bike sequence was cool as heck, and most of us kids got on our bikes pretending to be on speeder bikes as we raced down roadways or sidewalks. The way these bikes were filmed was very innovative and still holds up today. The only scene where Moff Jerjerrod showed backbone was when he refused Vader access to the Emperor. At first, Vader is annoyed, but Jerjerrod states that it is the Emperor's wishes, and the Dark Lord quickly ceases his assault, realizing he is out of line. This is just another example that Vader only kills when he has to. If he was so hell-bent on killing subordinates, as some ignorant theorists suggest, Jerjerrod would not have survived this encounter. For more depth to understand Vader's treatment towards Imperials, see my Star Wars video for the breakdown of his methodology. Having the biker scouts using distraction tactics to sneak up on Leia continued the idea that these guys were elite and tactical, and that the Empire was a serious threat. However, they are about to be made fools of later in the film. After waiting to see the Emperor, Darth tells his master about his son on the planet. It's interesting that the Emperor doesn't sense Luke, but it makes sense because Vader has a connection to his son. Having the Emperor question Vader's perspective on the matter is also very intelligent writing to foreshadow upcoming events. One of the things not laid out in the film is the Ewok hierarchy and how it works. Though the film is not clear about it, this is one of those few things I will note, as it does help stomach the Ewoks when watching it in retrospect as an adult. An interesting dynamic is the medicine man Logray and Chief Chirpa. Chirpa has actually led the Ewoks for 42 seasons, but he is getting a bit senile. With the arrival of the Empire, the forest has been exploited by the Imperials in their mechanical constructions, and many wildlife has been affected, disrupting Ewok hunts. Logray is an opportunistic, egotistical medicine man looking for power over his fellow Ewoks. Logray actually tried to encourage dark rituals like sacrifices amongst the Ewoks, like roasting captives such as Han and Luke. Logray's pride is evident when he ignores C-3PO, who is supposed to be a god. And then, during C-3PO's tale, you can see Logray hovering over Chirpa, trying to influence him. It is the Ewok Paplu, who is a warrior in the tribe, that addresses the Ewoks to support the rebels, and Logray quickly pivots to support the strangers to save face and announce they are part of the tribe. After the Battle of Endor, Logray would be ousted from the Ewok village and labeled a coward and bully. Paplo would become the new medicine man. An interesting thing about all this is that most Ewoks who were followers of Logray can be noticed because they have bones on their outfits, like Tebow, who was Logray's lieutenant. And there are few of them because many think Logray is problematic for their way of life. Most Ewoks don't take pride in adorning themselves with bones. Another interesting thing to note is that Wicket is the largest opponent of Logray, and because of that, Wicket rarely stays in the village. This is why he was out in the woods and found Leia as he was wandering to avoid conflicts with other Ewoks loyal to Logray. I just mention this because it's very interesting stuff, and it adds needed depth to what would otherwise be bland teddy bears that conveniently oust the Empire. You can find these details in any publication pre-Disney or fan sites, and Lucasfilm has always fleshed out every part character in the classic and prequel films. The problem is you just can't be told these things in films due to pacing. However, if you watch the film knowing this stuff, it makes the Ewoks a little more palatable nonetheless, which is why I mention it. Moving on, when Wicket hugs Han's leg, this is Harrison Ford's non-scripted reaction. There was a scene where, purring like a cat, I hug Han Solo's leg while C-3PO tells the stories around the campfire. The look of surprise and then resignation on Harrison's face wasn't acted. Now, a funny story behind the scenes was the cast of Ewoks. Little people are known as partying hard when they get together. Ian Bryce was responsible for ferrying the troop to and from the set. One day he got on the bus and not one Ewok cast member was aboard. Then he found a note that said, "Ian, we went to the airport. We've had it. We've had enough and we're leaving." Now, Ian was young and career-minded at that time and went into a panic, heading towards the airport, but his tire went flat not far from the location. Then he got on the Ewok bus, but it broke down. Suddenly, over the walkie, he heard Ewoks chuckling, and it was discovered that the entire cast of Ewoks arrived on set earlier to play this prank and were hiding. When Ian walked back to the set, the Ewok cast had t-shirts on, which said, "Revenge of the Ewoks." Now, Leia being Luke's sister was never the plan before 1980. The first draft of Jedi always had this in it, no doubt. This was Lucas not wanting to keep making Star Wars films in the future. I understand why he did it, but I would have been very happy if the other was never revealed in this trilogy for ambiguity. I think it awfully convenient Leia is his sister, but I accept it without complaint. When Leia recalls her mother, it really doesn't make sense considering what we saw in the prequel trilogy. They really rushed Padme's death and needed to flesh it out more to make Leia's recollection connect to what we saw. Padme should not have died in childbirth. She should have survived for a time on Alderaan depressed, in my opinion, to force the tragedy of Vader more, while Luke somehow was separated from her and was in Ben's hands. That's my fanboy take anyways. In this scene, Leia begins to show that she's a bit different from her normal character too. Instead of just telling Han, she doesn't communicate, which is not her style, and Han timidly apologizes. When Luke is brought to Vader, Luke refers to Vader as Father only, thus showing reverence and at the same time love, which has been a foreign concept to Anakin since the death of Padme. Had Luke stonewalled just a little bit, it is doubtful he could have turned Vader, but because he presents himself as a respectful son and believes in his father, Luke connects with his dad greatly. Now the prequels really flesh out Anakin and tie into Jedi greatly. We have covered in other videos how Vader fit into the Empire and his creation, but you must remember that Vader sees the Jedi as traitors and a group that is lost. Obviously he's misguided, but he thinks he's the good guy. And I'm not going to cover why he is this way because I covered it in other videos. At this moment, his son has been tainted by Jedi teaching, who Vader sees as villains. Taking Luke to the Emperor is a logical step because together they have a better chance of turning Luke than Vader going at it alone. Palpatine has been like a father figure to Vader since he was a boy, and 20 plus years later, Vader is still at his side. Luke is a temptation to have ambition for Vader, but taking Luke to the Emperor is basically trying to straighten this kid out, who has been polluted by misguided Jedi teachings. At this moment, I believe Vader is still loyal to Palpatine, and he even says so.
I must obey my master.
Despite this, you can begin to see cracks in Vader's resolve in this scene as well. But since I don't think my opinion is absolute, I am open for debate. After Poplu and Wicket take it upon themselves to plan a distraction for the guards, Han does some distracting of his own. What's funny is I always wondered why the scout just didn't blast Han rather than chase him. As a kid, I had a biker scout figure in 1983 and noticed that his gun was holstered on his boot. Maybe that's why he didn't quickly draw his sidearm. That's just me musing. Now, a very subtle blink and you'll miss it moment is Nik Sant taking his post in disguise outside the bunker. You can see him fidgeting with his helmet if you look close and then standing at attention behind the troopers. There was footage of him outside the bunker in this getup with Han and the team before they entered, but it never made it into the film. In the scene where Luke and the Emperor first clash with words, it's magnificent dialogue and writing. What makes it so good is the tension is a test of wills and words, and not many movies can achieve such quality. The stakes are souls, Luke or his father, and that can be worse than death. Rather than say anything else, I would rather tout the film's dialogue and performances for themselves.
Your overconfidence is your weakness.
Your faith in your friends is yours.
It is pointless to resist, my son.
Now, the invasion of the shield generator was much longer before it was cut down. It showed a shootout between troopers and the rebels, and then Han and Leia blowing the door open. There was some minuscule dialogue tweaks, but nothing that would have made the film better. During the bunker scene, Barry Holland, who played the Imperial commander, recalled a funny story between him and Harrison Ford when he called Han,
You rebel scum.
In the rehearsal, Harrison Ford looked at him funny and responded, "What did you call me?" and then playfully fake slapped him in the face. They must have liked this exchange because they would later film a similar exchange in the film, but gladly it was left out because I thought Han had done enough humor at this point in the movie for my tastes.
Scum?
The space battle in Return of the Jedi is the best of all Star Wars films in my opinion. Yes, I like it more than Revenge of the Sith as well. I don't think this dated at all, and the tension of this battle combined with what is going on with Luke and the Sith is unmatched in any Star Wars film to date. These two story threads in the third act of the film really makes Jedi a worthy conclusion to the classic trilogy. As for the Battle of Endor, well, we're getting to it. For now, just soak in scenes like this. Now, there were multiple characters filmed for the pilots of the rebel ships. The variety included 2 women, a Celestian, a Mon Calamari, and there were a few jokes put into the dialogue.
Fried calamari tonight.
Fried calamari tonight.
The actors would be fed lines and then they repeated them, sometimes not knowing it was a joke.
This is the last time I fly Lucas Air.
This is the last time I fly Lucas Airways. Prepare for Marin takeoff.
These scenes were not necessary, but are interesting. I'm actually glad some of the scenes didn't make it into the film because some of the deliveries are just bad.
I'm hit!
It's your left power supply.
It's my left power supply.
Got it.
Got it.
There were also more deleted scenes, which was on the Millennium Falcon, showing various techs tending to the Falcon during the battle. It also harkened back to the 1977 Star Wars film by showing Colonel Kraken using the gunner stations in the Falcon. Again, these scenes were not needed, but they're interesting. During production, there was some concern that the Ackbar costume would not work, and as a result, they filmed Dermot Crowley as General Crix Maydean to fill in if the character didn't work. To be honest, I like the scenes with Maydean, but I actually think Ackbar shows much more passion and life. There were only 2 moments in the Maydean scene that got my attention. The first was when Marquand yelled at actors for acting before their cues.
Flash! Stagger! Don't stagger until I tell you! Keep flying.
The other was when the Star Destroyer Executor went down and Maydean and his crew cheered.
The big flash. And a cheer!
On a side note, Dermot arrived on the set of Jedi smooth-faced, but because Kenner made the figure of him with a beard, and it was in production, they gave him a fake beard. In some of these shots, he does look like a regular bearded G.I. Joe doll from the 60s and 70s. Now we come to the Battle of Endor, and there is really not much to say except it's completely unbelievable that the Ewoks ever had a chance against battalions of Imperials. When arrows are fired at stormtroopers and biker scouts, it looks possible, but when you realize stormtroopers have full body armor, it's kind of unbelievable that they would have any effect. What's worse is stormtroopers charge towards Ewoks as they are clearly obstructed in brush. Are you telling me they wouldn't use their weapons to shoot in said area instead? And the only reason Han, Leia, and the rebels survive this melee by the bunker is because Imperials are not shooting them. You can see in many shots Imperials just standing around, looking around, and not even using their weapons. For a perfect example of how ludicrous this battle is, you only need to see Ewoks flying in their gliders with 2 stones as their armaments. Think of the time it would take for said Ewok to land, get more stones, and then get back in the battle. It is totally ineffective. And if you muse about the logistics of this battle, it will fry your brain. You're telling me that the Ewoks knew exactly where to put trip cords so speeder bikes would go through them perfectly. How convenient. You're telling me that Ewoks had the time since the night before to cut all these tree logs in Imperial policed areas, set them up, and put them right where they needed to be to take out scout walkers. Look at these logs. They were hoisted up in trees and placed perfectly to smash this AT-ST at just the right second. Anyone who has had a hammer or a pulley or anything that makes noise in the woods knows how sound travels. Are you telling me the Imperials didn't notice all this being set up or report any of these noises? Especially after rebel activity has been confirmed on this planet? And by the way, where are the AT-AT walkers? Because we know they patrol this area as previous scenes set up. It is just absurd, and the truth of what the battle would look like is this. I appreciate that these moments are in the film, but there's not enough of them, and in the end we all know this is what the battle would have looked like. The conveniences of Jabba's palace and this battle really scars this film in the long run. Now, take a moment to remember that this film has deep emotions for me as an 11-year-old and impact me today. I'm not hating on it. We have to be honest with what is in it, and it just doesn't stack up to the earlier 2 film standards when looking at it objectively. Now, Harrison Ford's performance is either over the top or on autopilot, and Leia is very different. And sadly, we know Ford didn't take the role seriously in this movie because he referred to his character as Ham Yoyo. Now, there is a deleted sequence that would have carried on for the rest of the film, and it covered Moff Jerjerrod. Before Luke draws his saber, Palpatine would give specific instructions to Jerjerrod to blow up Endor if the shield generator was disabled, to which Jerjerrod would respond,
"Yes, Your Highness. But we have several battalions stationed on the moon."
You will destroy it.
"Yes, Your Highness."
We would have then returned to the film proper, where Vader shows his loyalty to Palps. Otherwise, he would have let Luke kill him. As I said before, he wants to turn Luke away from the misguided teachings of the Jedi, and he thinks the Emperor can help him. After all, he's been loyal to him for over 20 years. We would then return to the Jerjerrod sequence, where the dish has just been destroyed. In response, he orders the Death Star to be turned on Endor.
Sir, the deflector shield is down, and we've lost all contact with the generating station.
Position the station to blow up the moon.
The fight between Vader and Luke in Return of the Jedi was and is, for me both as a boy and an adult, the pinnacle of Star Wars. It is the most memorable fight both for its relevance and tension. No other fight in all of Star Wars matches the confrontation in Jedi for me. There is just so much behind it, and in credit to Marquand, its timing and performances are superb. It is when Luke and Darth fight for round 2 that the soundtrack for Return of the Jedi needs to be brought up. The final duel theme can often bring tears to my eyes when I hear it. It is a powerful track, and there are many others in this soundtrack. But like the movie itself, the soundtrack suffers the same problems the film does. I say this because I was disappointed in this soundtrack. Now, I am speaking about the full 2-disc soundtrack, with every track of the film. Regularly, I put in Star Wars, Empire, Phantom Menace without skipping a single track during car drives. But when I listen to Return of the Jedi, which is at least once a year in my car, especially on long trips, I rarely, if ever, listen to Disc 1 and find myself skipping Ewok themes. Overall, it just doesn't stack up to the first 2 films and Phantom Menace scores. The irony is that the final duel is on my top 3 Star Wars tracks spanning all the films ever made. I am actually curious if many of you share this outlook or disagree with me, so post in the comments. Hamill's eyes is what sells this encounter. His emoting is dead on, and it makes everything believable. When he beats his father, you can see he's loving it, and when he hears the laughter, it's hard to know if Luke was going to finish his father or retract by himself. When he notices his hand, he realizes he is becoming what he is fighting, and he remembers who he should be, and it's in his facial expressions that we know this. He knows what the Emperor says is true. His hate has made him powerful, and thus he catches his breath and remembers that he does not need his weapon, and this returns to the lesson Yoda gave him in the cave. Now, I want to take a moment to remind everyone that in the first Star Wars, Luke was so interested in anything having to do with his father, and it was what drove him to the Force. Thus, Luke has been chasing his father and wanting to be like him since the 1977 film.
You failed, Your Highness. I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
This line has great meaning here. The reverence towards his father is clear, and he's willing to die for it. In Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, the son emulates the father by becoming a Jedi. By the end of Jedi, the father emulates the son to become like him. The Emperor does not mess around with Luke, and there is nothing he has learned Force-wise to stop the Emperor's onslaught. So he calls out his father, and this is because he has faith in his father. In the Lucas trilogy, we always come back to faith. And if you don't recognize this in the classic trilogy, the prequels can be very hard to like or quantify. For my personal view, I believe Vader wanted to straighten his son out, and the moment Palpatine said,
"And take your father's place at my side,"
it quickly dawned upon him that his whole life has been spoiled by the lie that Palpatine cared for him like a father, and that Vader's true family was what really mattered. Vader turns to the dark side to protect his familial bonds with Padme. His obsession to keep her safe is his downfall. In Jedi, his desire to protect Luke is his salvation. The culmination of all of this is that when the Emperor is killed, a Jedi has returned. Now we return to the Jar Jar deleted sequence as the Strike Force enters the superstructure of the Death Star. The Moff would give orders which were basically countermeasures.
Rebel fighters have entered the superstructure.
Open the power discharge gates. Flood sectors 304 and 138. I just slow them up a bit.
At the end of the film, Endor still exists only because the Moff was indecisive. Because when it came time to fire, he hesitated, and then the Death Star would blow up.
Moon target in range. Sir, moon target in range now.
Commence firing.
Within a few seconds of the order, the Death Star would explode. Although I like the new score for the Ewok celebration, I prefer the classic Ewok celebration theme, and I prefer the ending without a bunch of worlds cheering because the celebration gives a more personal touch for the victors in this film. I understand there is a whole galaxy out there, but we went on a journey with these characters in this film, and I think it is more appropriate to celebrate with them at the end of the film rather than an entire galaxy of strangers. Thus, I see the classic version as more intimate in its approach. Now, in the modern versions of Return of the Jedi, whether Blu-ray or DVD, Hayden Christensen appears as a Force ghost, and I do not accept this. Even though I try to respect the creator's choices in films, Sebastian Shaw was always the image that makes sense. After all, Ben is not Ewan McGregor. And at the time Darth redeemed himself, he was old, so why would he revert back to youth when he was corrupted? Jake Lloyd would have been a better apparition than Hayden, because at the time Anakin was pure and good. Originally, only Ben and Yoda would be spirits at the end of the film, and when they decided to put Shaw in during a pickup shot, Kazanjian had his doubts, and in a prolific moment, he argued with Lucas about the decision. I'd started thinking about it, and I said to George, why? This guy, he's like Hitler. He's killed, he's done all these terrible things, and now we're saying he's equal with Yoda and Obi-Wan, as if he's gone to heaven or whatever. And George Lucas pointed at me. He was real close, and he says, "Isn't that what your religion is all about?" And boy, that was like being slapped on the side of the face, because yes, it is what my religion is all about, and obviously his, but I hadn't thought it through. There are a lot of things to love in Jedi. Jabba's palace is just one of the coolest environments in Star Wars, and the final fleet battle is breathtaking. And then, of course, there's the showdown with Darth, Luke, and the Emperor. The dual conflict is just amazing storytelling, and it is the thing that holds up Return of the Jedi. Without it in the movie, it would be very disappointing. Multiple critics and fans cite Return of the Jedi as their favorite of the classic trilogy, and I would bet that most of them would say one of the main reasons is the Vader-Luke dynamic and the confrontation as the reason why. Unfortunately, despite my tremendously powerful emotions when it comes to this movie, I cannot join that group. I rank Return of the Jedi as my least favorite of the three classic films, but I revere it nonetheless as a staple in my movie-going life. As the saga ended in theaters, it began on television and VHS to keep the magic alive. Though they fought hard to get the rights to air the sequel sooner on television, 20th Century Fox did the opposite. Star Wars had already aired on pay-per-view in September 1982 and would land on HBO during the winter of 1983. It was released on VHS in May 1982, right at the date Fox negotiated. The film would finally be shown on CBS on Sunday, February 26, 1984, from 8 to 11 p.m. with a 22-minute making of feature included, which was hosted by Mark Hamill.
You are about to become part of the phenomena of Star Wars. In a few minutes, you'll see a movie that's become more than just a movie.
In November 1984, The Empire Strikes Back would land on VHS. It would eventually end up on television on NBC on Sunday, November 22nd, 1987. Way past holdback deadlines. Jedi would land on VHS in February 1986 and would also air on NBC on Sunday, March 19, 1989. Unlike the first two Star Wars films that had a presence for years to come, Jedi seemed to disappear from the zeitgeist within a year. All the kids were into G.I. Joe now, and those that were not were getting into He-Man. In my neighborhood in Toledo, Ohio, most of my friends completely ignored the second wave of Jedi stuff in 1984. I found myself with only one friend that was still into Star Wars by the time Transformers were becoming the rage. And within a year, Kenner released their final wave of Power of the Force figures, which no one bought, and they ended up in clearance bins. Later, these figures would skyrocket in value and are worth a small fortune today. In the 80s, toys were huge and creative, and kids treated Star Wars like it was old news by 1985. Many kids grew into their teens during the mid to late 80s, and I was one of them. Though we said goodbye to toys, we always remembered them. And Star Wars seemed to be that discussion we had of the good old days, along with G.I. Joe, He-Man, and Transformers. It would stay that way for many years, until new adventures with Han, Luke, and Leia would reignite our memories and light a fire under the fan base that would result in the reimagining of figures in 1995. And the films would return in 1997 and would pave the way to the prequels. But that is best covered in our prequel videos. We really thank you for being a part of our classic trilogy coverage, and we hope you're around for our future videos, for there are many to come. Until next time, remember,
may the Force be with you.
Next up is Gremlins, and we hope you don't want to miss that. We also wanted to take a moment to shout out a channel called Squabblebox that reached out to us. This channel is very interesting with some movie insights, and one that I will definitely do is Psycho 2, and they've got a pretty good video on it. Check them out, and if you like them, subscribe and give them some likes. If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. If you really like what you see here, click super thanks to help the channel.